we're going to be doing a little work on the little Timber King here today. Timber King 1220, which really we're not working on the Timber King, we're working on the engine. This is a Kohler Command Pro 20, for whatever that's worth. I guess it's the 20 horsepower. But the backstory here is this thing has really kind of run like crap since I bought it. Now, that's not to say that that's the fault of Kohler or Timber King. I've actually been pretty impressed with the Kohler engine as far as the fact that it's now sat out here in the weather for 2 years already and it's been fine. But ever since I've had it, it wants to run with the choke all the way on all the time. I can maybe back it off just a little bit, but if I take the choke even back to, halfway, the engine wants to die. So I pretty much have to run it all the way on with the choke. And the other issue is lately what it's doing is I'll get it warmed up, rev it, get the blade engaged, rev it up, start running. And the instant this engine hits any resistance at all, like I try to push a little fast with the blade, the engine bogs down and then it won't catch back up. It sits there and it just wears down and wants to stall. So I actually have to disengage the blade, let the engine rev up and kind of clean out a little bit, and then I can re-engage the blade and idle the engine back up to cut. I've changed the fuel filter before to try to fix it. I've changed the air filter before. Neither one of those things really does it. I'm thinking there's a plug jet somewhere in the carburetor, which would make sense since the carburetor is already wanting to run fully choked. I had an issue when I first bought it that the air cover here had vibrated loose, and I didn't really notice. I was out here running it one afternoon, and I saw this thing like shaking around, and it was totally loose. Well, with this lid loose, the issue is, with the lid loose, then you get air that can bypass the filter, which means you can suck dirt into your engine. So that very well may have been the catalyst, because when I first bought it, it wasn't horrible. It would run about half choke and be fine. But somewhere along the way, it got to where it wanted full choke all the time. I mean, it's in a very dusty environment as a sawmill. You can see sawdust on the filter here. So if that filter was loose and it sucked some sawdust into the carburetor, that's pretty much a no-brainer. Now for the carburetor, I found a kit online. This is on eBay. It was like, gosh, $27 sounds too cheap. Maybe it was $37. $28.99, I don't know. Kit on eBay for this engine. This has carburetor, fuel filter, fuel lines, and 2 spark plugs for like 30 bucks. When I first started looking to replace the carburetor on this thing, first I was looking for a rebuild kit. And then I thought, man, I've seen carburetors, I've bought carburetors for Predator engines for 20 bucks. They're so cheap. And so I started looking for that. And what I found was a carburetor that was $250. I was like, well, that's not going to work. So I'd always put it off. And then I just got to looking around the other night because it angered me when it was running real crappy. So I got to looking again, and sure enough, I found a carburetor. Turns out there's like about 14 billion different models on these Kohler engines, as far as Kohler Command Pro, Kohler Champion, Kohler Courage, you name it. They got all these different little names, but pretty much they're all the same engine with the same carburetor. Different horsepower ratings on the engine, but pretty much all around the same carburetor. So anyway, we're gonna start taking this thing apart. We're gonna swap this carburetor out. We're gonna do this full tune-up, swap the carbs, spark plugs, swap the fuel filter. I do not have a new air filter, but I'm gonna knock this one out and clean it. It doesn't really look that bad, to be honest with you. And yeah, we'll get all that taken apart, put together, maybe show you some stuff along the way, and then we'll see how she runs. So the first thing, with the air filter off, you've got 3 bolts here that hold this plate down on top of the carburetor. And you've got this little rubber hose here that I think is probably just a crankcase vent. I'm not entirely sure. Or it's maybe a fuel tank vent. Well, no, it's not a fuel tank vent. But it's just laid up in here. It doesn't hook to anything. So that's why I was thinking maybe, like I said, well, I think maybe it's a crankcase vent of some sort, because it's basically putting something that's already cleaned. It's putting some sort of clean or recycled air or gas back into your intake. So we're gonna take these 3 bolts out, pull this plate off and see what we find. Little correction, there's 2 more screws back here. Those are buried in sawdust, so I didn't see them at first. So these 2 here just took that bracket off that screws your air filter down. This one here holds the plate, and these 2 in the back hold the plate. So this is kind of interesting. The controls here on the front actually have a cable that runs around to the back, and this is like your little pivot plate. Oftentimes you see that component is mounted directly on top of the carburetor, but it's actually a turn point, and then there's 2 more rods here that come off and come up to the side of the carburetor and actually function it. So it has to go through, you know, there's your choke mechanism. You see it's this cable shifting in and out, and this cable here is actually pulling backward and forward. So there's actually 2 different pieces that have to move. And I'm looking at it now, and moving the throttle linkage does not move very much on this thing at all. The carburetor is really, the choke is really controlling a lot of it. You're not seeing that whole plate move on the bottom. Well, of course you can't see the bottom plate, but just looking at that rod move for the throttle, it doesn't do a lot. But anyway, it looks like there's a couple of bolts right here on the back that hold that carburetor bolted down. So we're gonna get those pulled loose, slip this thing up and off, and swap the new one in. We're gonna clean all this up a little bit while we're in here with some spray just to kind of make it nice. So I could not get the carburetor all the way out at first with this little control module on there, but it's just 2 Phillips head screws. Took those out and swung this thing over to the side. That let me see in there a little better. And this front bolt, there was not 2 bolts in the back like I thought. There was 1 bolt on the back corner here and 1 on the front corner here. But this one actually is some sort of ground also, and it holds this wire down right here on the carburetor. So be very careful when you're pulling that out. Make sure you get the bolt and that little lock washer, and make sure you don't forget to hook that wire back up. I'm not sure just yet what it actually does, but let's just make sure that we don't forget about it. It looks like there's some other sensor here. Connected with a quick electrical disconnect. I'll have to look at my new carburetor and see if that's on there, what that is. I know on my lawnmower it had a Kohler Courage. It had some sort of solenoid on there. I don't know what the solenoid does, but anyway, we'll look and see with the new carburetor if it's already pre-wired and it's got this quick connector, if we have to splice something in. So we've got the old carb out, but I just wanted to show you guys how to do it. Once you've loosened the bolts and disconnected your wire there, just pull up real easy and then rotate it very slowly. And as you rotate it, work on those 2 linkages. You see how they just have that little S-curve in them. So as you're rotating the carburetor slowly to the right, you're also working on wiggling those linkages out. And then of course there's that real sensitive spring wire on your throttle control that you've always got to be real careful to slip that out. It just hooks in there, but slip it out without bending it or kinking it. So we'll pull the old one off here. We're gonna get that old seal scraped off of there and get our new one ready and bolted down. This new kit, I've got to say, is pretty awesome. I don't remember the name of the eBay store that I bought it from, but I'll try to put it in the comments. Oh, that's funny. It says made in China on the box, but when I bought it on eBay, it said made in the USA. Probably assembled in the USA as far as the kit. Anyway, the kit was put together in the USA. The parts are all from China. I have no idea. But it's a pretty cool little kit, really. Like I said, it comes with the fuel filter, obviously the gaskets, the carburetor, 2 new spark plugs, new fuel lines, and all the clamps, and even some zip ties to kind of tie things up with and keep it tidy. So I'm really happy with that. Like I said, I'll have to put a link on where I got it, just so if you guys are looking, you'll know. But it does already have the wire here with the quick connect already crimped on there. So it's got that same plug. So I won't even have to splice any wiring. That's really handy. It's little things like that when you buy these sort of universal kits, that you'll find some little deal like that where the wire is not crimped, or you got to do something little stupid, annoying thing. So this looks like it's going to be a really easy turnkey, just plug and play. So we're going to go ahead and get our new clips on, our new little fuel line jumper hose there, and push forward on hooking this baby up. So I just noticed something as I was swapping out these gaskets. This big gasket was on the bottom. There was no gasket on top. This is where the air breather bolts down to it. So if there's no gasket there, this thing's absolutely going to leak air, which would explain why it wanted to run on choke, because it was bypassing the air filter a little bit and sucking air. There's a new gasket that comes in the new kit that's designed to fit there. It fits right here on top. But my old one did not have it. I've never taken it off. So maybe it's always been gone, and maybe it just finally wiggled loose and, you know, maybe when that air filter rattled loose, this somehow, you know, got a little bit of debris and then it started sucking air past it. I don't know. So that may have honestly been all the issue, because I've tried this before. I've tried swapping carburetors on small engines before, and I didn't have a gasket, or I tore a gasket and was like, oh, whatever, it'll be fine. And it's never fine. These things are, they're very simple, but they're also very, very fine-tuned, and the slightest little thing can mess them up. So we'll make sure I get our gaskets in there right. I've already put our new one on here on the bottom. So now we're going to set our new carburetor back in, hook our linkages back up as we do, and get it bolted down, and make sure it's all clean as we do. Okay, another thing, this little bushing goes in where your throttle linkage hooks to the carburetor. The new carburetor did not have it, so I robbed it out of the old one. And all it is this carburetor, again, is kind of universal, so there's a pretty big hole there where that linkage hooks in. And if I hook it in right now, it's real sloppy in there. So we're just gonna push this bushing in. It just snaps into place. You know, it's got little tabs on it there. So it just snaps in, but that'll help hold that linkage a little tighter so it's not wiggling. Okay, so we've got our new one in. Our linkage is hooked up, and this wire is wrapped down and around the bottom of this solenoid. Now, I don't really know that matters, but the factory wire is kind of long, and there's space down in this little cavity that you can kind of wrap it down and around to just use up some space. But just check our linkages here. There's our choke. So that's working. Maybe kind of hard to do it one-handed. It's kind of stiff. And our throttle linkage. You can see the throttle adjusting down inside of there, which of course it's partially based on engine RPMs and stuff, so you shouldn't expect to see it run full open or full closed. I don't think, anyway. I'm going to check all the moving components and everything through here. I'm going to check all that stuff and make sure that it's slick and easy. And it looks like there's a couple different screws. Obviously there should be some screws on your carburetor itself that you can tune it. There should be a screw here that kind of controls your throttles, your max idle. And it looks like maybe even another screw back here might be able to be adjusted a little bit to really rev this baby up. I'm not for sure on that, but we're just going to kind of play with it and see. But big thing, I'm going to clean all this up. I wish I had like some graphite spray or something, because you can see that these are rubbing when I was moving them, which it's not making them not work, but they're not working smoothly. Okay, one other thing I just ran into, well, two things actually. It appears that the new fuel line they sent is smaller, but I was able to force it on here. I'm talking like 1/4 inch versus 3/8, okay? We're not talking a huge difference. But I was able to actually cram it on over the nipples. The clamps that they sent with it don't actually do any good. Like if I put a clamp on here, it doesn't hold anything. So because the line is smaller, I just kind of squished it on there, and it'll hold itself just fine, and I don't think it'll leak because I really had to cram it on there. But the old one, I'll show you, I found something else that could have been a problem. This old fuel line, I was going to reuse this fuel line actually, and purely by chance I noticed right there, maybe you guys can see that, there's a pinhole, okay? And that may not be the only one, but that pinhole could have been covered over with grease or dirt or something and then decided to open itself up. And if that happens, then you're on a vacuum. This part of the hose is on a vacuum. It's sucking fuel from the tank, which means it's going to suck air in there as well, which again would mess with your choke settings, and it would make the engine want to stall down and die like it's not getting any fuel. So, you know, maybe I didn't need a new carburetor. Maybe I just needed a new fuel hose. But the new one's bolted on there. Like I said, the linkages all work. I'm going to slick these up a little bit. I thought I had some WD-40. I got WD-40, if it still works. This is my toolbox out here, and I've got some carbon choke cleaner. Cool. So yeah, we'll slick those up a little bit, and then we'll get our top gasket put back on, get our plates bolted back down, and spark plugs, fuel filter, that's easy stuff. But we'll get all that done too. Well, I found the old gasket. It was on there. It was just stuck on the bottom of that plate. So I'm leaning more and more towards that pinhole in the fuel line. Very well may have been all of our problems. Okay, so everything's bolted back down on here. One more thing I did was this plate was just kind of greasy and slimy, which I didn't get at all because I didn't clean that bracket. But I went ahead and cleaned this up really well. Just used some brake clean to blast it off there, wiped it down with a rag, because this is inside of the air filter. So any debris that you leave inside of there can ultimately get sucked into your engine. So got that cleaned up really good, got it all bolted back down. We're going to throw our air filter back on here, close all this up, and then we're going to go ahead and do our spark plugs, which easy in and out on spark plug. We'll do our fuel filter, also easy in and out. And I'm just thinking more about that pinhole in the fuel line. I'm thinking maybe I need to change out all my fuel lines. You know, it wouldn't hurt. But, yeah, I don't have them. I'll have to go buy them. But anyway, it made me kind of think, because I've noticed before, this fuel filter, it's supposed to be clear. Gets debris on it. But I've noticed before that I could look in there and I could see a little air bubble in there. And I always kind of wondered how the heck it could have an air bubble, you know, if the whole thing hangs down low and should be flooded with not flooded like flooded engine, but flooded with fuel. And it could have been picking up that air bubble, you know, potentially anyway, through that pinhole, you know, when you shut the engine off. Or it could just be trapping an air bubble right here in this top somehow. So the air bubble never really bothered me, and I don't know that that's evidence of the pinhole. But the way that it was running, wanting to stay on choke, acting like it was starving for fuel, that's evidence of the pinhole. Okay, so a couple of bonuses, I think. At least one. This was a fun little win. The new spark plugs have a bigger hex nut. This was a 16 millimeter is what I was using anyway. And the new one acted like they wanted a 20 millimeter or 13/16. What I have is this spark plug tool that comes with every single little Predator engine you ever buy. And that's a dead nuts fit. So I don't know if there's been some sort of universal upgrade that all new spark plugs are this size or what. But anyway, this little tool is killing it. And I've just got to put you just got to put a little rod through the end there, or a screwdriver, to be able to get your little T-handle and torque on it. But I'm just going to go ahead and run those down. And then I'll go get my screwdriver and torque it up. I want to show you that. The other thing is, a little while back I got a crack in my water hose. It was all dry rotted, and so my wife went to town and got me the new hose. I hadn't put it on yet, and the reason I didn't put it on was because I don't have hose clamps. I have a wire twisted. But what I got is my new hose and some quick clamps that came with my fuel lines that I couldn't use because they're too big. So I'm thinking I can throw that water hose on there and use those clamps, which would be a super win. But let me get these spark plugs torqued down, get the fuel filter changed, and then we'll see about the water hose. But I want to start the engine first. Okay, well, another little gem I just discovered. Went to change my fuel filter out, and that is crushed flat. Now, why in the world would that be crushed flat? I mean, it's not crushed like, you know, the hose clamp wouldn't do that to it. This thing had to have gotten hot and had to have sucked down to collapse. But you can look in there and you can see how much the ID is restricted because of that. So that certainly wasn't helping anything. Also, my, which that's a smaller fuel filter. See, this is the one that was on it when I bought it. See, look, that's an advantage to being trashy like me and never picking up, is you've still got the old junk fuel filter on the ground as a sample. But also I found the ends of my hose were cracked. I thought I saved little pieces. Maybe I dropped them on the ground. But anyway, the ends of the hose here were starting to split out. So when I hit this new fuel filter in, which it's smaller, this is for 1/4 inch line and this is 3/8 or whatever it is. I tightened that hose clamp down and this was dripping and leaking. But I cut that frayed end off and put this other hose clamp on it. It's holding now. Well, I think it is. There's no gasoline in there to tell. But that's done. New fuel filter's on. New spark plugs are on. And so we're going to clean up some tools here and try to start this thing. One bump of the key, fill the fuel filter instantly, which is a good sign because that's telling you that it's sucking fuel like it's supposed to. You know, with a pinhole before, if the machine sat for, you know, a week or a month, I'd have to sit here and crank on it for a little bit to get it to actually start. It wouldn't just want to fire up right away, which meant that it was, you know, sucking air through that pinhole and not wanting to prime right away. It's probably going to start and die. I mean, it just started for just a second and then died because it's got air in the system. So it might take a little bit of work to get it going here, but let's see. So that's on choke. So I'm cleaning the choke off and you can hear the engine smoothing out. Oh my God! Oh my God! That's the first time this engine has run off choke in as long as I can remember. Oh, it sounds so good. Just like that.